How is everybody this morning? I hope everybody is doing well. We are back with part 10 of the Robert Bardo murder trial. I just checked on YouTube Studio to see if I got a copyright claim on a U2 song yesterday, because it just dawned on me. I was like, oh crap. You guys remember when we were doing the Phil Spector? Oh, hold on. I need to put the phone on do not. Okay. Sorry. It was making all little kind of bleeps and bloops, and I had to put it on do not disturb. Okay. Because remember back when we were doing the Phil Spector trial, that one like reel that Lana Clarkson had made, like the demo reel with her doing like different characters and stuff, that stupid reels that she did, it had a Steely Dan song on it. So I got copyright claimed for that, and I had to go back and take the music out. And when I was trying to make sure that we were where I thought we were, because you guys know how my brain works or doesn't work, I wanted to make sure I was remembering correctly. So I rewatched that part where he was like jamming out to the U2 song, you know? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh crap, I'm gonna get in trouble for that song. So I went to YouTube Studio to see that if they put a restriction on it, which I figured they probably would, and no restriction. So I was like, okay, cool. But maybe they just haven't gotten to it yet. But of course they have bots that do that flag stuff. So maybe they're not going to flag it. So we'll see. I'll keep an eye on it. They'll probably, if they do, they usually send out an email, although I'm bad about not checking my email. But we'll have to keep an eye on that and see if I get in trouble. But right now I'm good. So, yay. Because it's going to look pretty weird if I have to take the music out. Of course, they do say right before they play it that they're going to play a song. But it's going to look kind of weird if there's no music and he's just doing this. I mean, it looked weird already that he was doing that to music. But if he does it and there's no music, it's going to look even weirder. Good morning, Judy. Good morning, Jennifer. Why is nobody here? Is it too cold? There's nobody yelling at me that I was late. Nobody telling me that I'm messing up their schedule. Where's everybody? Is it too cold? How is it too cold to get out of bed and go to your computer, people? Okay, I also noticed something else when I was in YouTube Studio this morning. Hang on, my eyes are itching. I keep forgetting to get more eye drops. So, another thing I noticed in YouTube Studio. Replay crew, I love and adore you. You're just as important than my everyday chatters. But you guys, please, can you like the video? Please, for me, can you just tap the like button? Because I have a lot of replay crew and only have likes from my people that are in my live chat. So please, for me, please, can you? Please, for me, can you? Thank you. Okay. Oh, good morning, Jen. Good morning, Judy. Let's see, we have trivia. In the 18 months leading up to the incident, Bardo often would walk through his neighborhood and downtown Tucson, making obscene gestures at people, running through others' yards, and being disruptive. Several days before he traveled to Los Angeles, Bardo threatened his neighbors who were throwing a party across the street. If you don't shut up, I'm going to get my .357 and pew you. Oh my goodness. No one saw these red flags with this man? Oh my gosh. That is insane. That is insane. You know, I meant to mention this yesterday. I saw a short yesterday. It's not as bad as saying, if you don't shut up, I'm going to shoot you. But, this guy filmed a woman. I wouldn't have filmed. I would have gone out and talked to her, and then I would have called the police. Well, I would have filmed to show the police, but this woman. Now I'm getting Facebook notifications on the computer. Leave me alone, people. I'm busy. This woman pulled up into this man's driveway to charge her car. And she's got her car hooked up to his charger. And she's leaning back on the trunk of her car, playing games on her. They're doing something on her phone. Just chilling at this stranger's house. And he comes out of the house and he goes, "Can I help you with something?" And she goes, "Oh no, I'm just charging my car. It'll probably take about 20 minutes. And he goes, "Why are you charging your car? This is my house." And she said, "Because my car was dying." And he said, "Yes, but you couldn't come knock on the door and ask me if it was okay?" And she goes, "Well, I saw that there was a charger here and my car was dying." And he said, "Yeah, but this is my house and my wife is going to be home in a minute and you're in her spot." And she goes, "It's okay, I'll be done in about 20 minutes. And he goes, "But this is my house." "Well, yeah, but I saw you had a charger and I'm pregnant and my car was about to die." And then she goes, "Are you recording me? Why are you recording me? You don't have my permission to record me." Can you believe that someone has the audacity to pull their car into someone else's driveway, use their charger, and then say, "You don't have my permission to record me"? My jacket's on inside out. Oh my God. The entitlement. Like telling the neighbors, "Shut up or I'm gonna shoot you." What? But I can't even say that it's a new thing, because now that I think about it, I'd forgotten about it. But when I was a kid, I had a swing set. Well, I'm a college graduate. I can put on a jacket. Jeez. When I was a kid, I had a swing set in the backyard. And we had a new family move into the neighborhood. And This woman let her kids come down the street to my house and let them play on my swing set. Didn't ask, didn't come to the door to say, can I play? You want to play? Nothing. They were just in the backyard on my swing set. So then, not long after that, we put in a pool. And my mom was like, we need a fence. We need a fence around this pool. If she let her kids just come down here and play. I think my mom had a talk with her. But mom was like, we gotta have a fence, because if she just lets her kids wander down here and they wander down into our pool and something happens, what's wrong with people? Don't understand. Oh my God. You don't own. You have your own little space. You don't own all of the space around you. You have to defer to other people. Yeah. Yeah, I looked out the window. I was like, Mom, there are kids on my swing set. And like, I didn't, how kids are like, ooh, there's kids to play with. I was brought up right. Like, I didn't run out and go play with the kids. I was like, Mom, why are those kids on my playset? Like, I was like, no, that's wrong. Like, I knew better at whatever age I was, 6, 7, I don't know. I was like, no, they're not supposed to be on my playset. Like, if they had come to the front door and been like, hi, we're so-and-so, we just moved in, do you want to play? Then yeah, that would have been fine. But that's not what happened. That would, and that was 40 years ago. Yeah. So it's not all brand new, even though it's gotten worse, but I hate people like that. I mean, you know what I mean? I don't hate people, but when people are that entitled, it drives me nuts. It's just, why are you that way? But see, this smacks of mental illness. And trespassing. Why no one called the police? This guy is like running through our yard. How did this guy fall through the cracks? This was a completely preventable crime. I'm wondering if the Japanese culture, hey Nichelle, if the Japanese culture was part of, I don't want to say problem, I don't want to blame, and this is not a racist thing, this is a culture thing. I know someone's probably going to accuse me of being racist. I'm not being racist. I'm talking about the Japanese culture. Because his mom was the one that didn't want him to have follow-ups on this stuff. Oh my God. Well, at least they rang your doorbell to ask, I guess. Me too. That's how I felt during my psych rotation in nursing school. I was terrified the entire time. It was my lowest grade in all of nursing school. I made straight A's and 1 C. and that was on my psych rotation. It terrifies me. I don't know if it's because, I mean, I was going to say because I don't understand it. I do understand, like, the textbook part of it, what they've discovered about mental illness, but it's unpredictable. That's what scares me, the unpredictability. With other illnesses, totally predictable. You have signs and symptoms, and then you figure out this is what disease they have, and what you do with mental illness too, but the behavior is unpredictable. And you never know what they're going to do next. And I think that's what scares me, the unpredictability. But for him to be like going in other people's yards and stuff, why didn't someone call the police? Why didn't they? Ugh. But his mom, I guess, didn't want any treatment. Like when they did do something, then she didn't want any follow-up done about it. And I don't know if that's a Japanese culture thing or just maybe both of the parents didn't want any. Maybe, I don't know. This is just such a bizarre. I didn't realize how bizarre this was. I thought it was more cut and dried, just like obsessed fan. Well, yeah. I'd be scared too. And mental health professionals will always say, oh, the mentally ill is not dangerous. They're not violent. They would never hurt anybody else. They may not intend to hurt anybody else, but with their erratic behavior, they could accidentally hurt somebody else. You don't know what they're going to do. They're unpredictable. And some people absolutely thrive on taking care of these kind of individuals. I do not. Now, when I was a nurse in a nursing home, I took care of dementia patients. And some of them are pretty scary. But the older patients are less active. I think that's why they don't. And they're scary too. But not to the point of one that's up, moving around, walking around. There was this one guy I remember. Hey, Carla. There was this one guy that he had dementia and he was mean. And he was a big guy. By the time I met him, he was in a wheelchair. They said when he was up walking around, he walked with a cane, and he would use the cane as a weapon. But he was so big that when he sat in his wheelchair, that his arm span the whole wall, the whole aisle of hall, whatever, the whole hall of the nursing home. Like, that's how big the guy was. His arm span was the whole hall. So, when he would get combative, he'd swing. And we couldn't get around him because his arm span was so wide. And when that happened, I would have to give him a shot of a sedative. You know how hard it is to give someone a shot when they're swinging at you? It's not easy. But yeah, I don't know. I don't understand. And this wasn't that long ago. It was in the late 80s. They understood mental health, and some of the terms were different. They've changed their thoughts on some of it, but let's go. Bye. How's your shoulder and your neck? Is it better?
They did bother me at all this morning. This side's hurting. But...
So the muscle relaxers and the pillow is helping.
Yeah. So far, yeah.
Good. then we don't have to go get x-rays and stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Now we just have to worry about your blood pressure.
Yep. I was hoping that it'd go down more, but it went up more. Went up again.
It's staying about the same. It was good yesterday.
Maybe that chicken I ate too.
It has nothing to do with the chicken you ate last night.
You never know. The cooker, pardon me, let her out.
A lot of parents will do that. Oh, they're autistic, or they're bipolar, or they're this, or they're that. Well, no, they don't diagnose kids with bipolar, but they do. And it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. Because the point of being a parent is to prepare your child for adulthood. And if they're autistic, you need to teach them how to be an autistic person in a world where most people are not autistic. You can't use it as an excuse. It drives me nuts. I know people that do that. My theory is that they were a mean person before they got dementia. That's my theory. I don't think dementia... Well, actually, I can't say that because after my dad had his stroke, and my dad never, ever, ever laid his hand on me in anger. And I got spankings, but I never in anger. But then after he had his stroke, he would pull my hair and tell me he was going to beat the poop out of me. And he never in a million years would he have done that if he was in his right mind. So I guess I can't really say that. That's what I used to think, though, before my dad had his stroke. I used to think that they were just mean people before the dementia. But in the case of that one guy, I think he was just mean before the dementia. Me too, Nichelle. Yeah, in fact, I have a friend who I think he had schizophrenia. Which usually starts in late teens, early adulthood, and I don't think we noticed it back then. I went to high school with him. I don't think we noticed it back then, or I think he masked it with drugs. And people with schizophrenia will self-medicate, and he drank a lot and took drugs, and then as an adult, when he would start to have like a lot of paranoia and stuff, his family would Baker Act him, and then they would treat his drug problems and not treat the mental problems, because they would attribute all of the mental problems to the drugs. But no, he would think people were up in trees around his house spying on him. He would cut the eyes out of his granddaughter's toys. They're her like stuffed animals, thinking that there were cameras in the eyes spying on him. Like, he had mental issues. It wasn't just the drugs. The drugs was his attempt to self-medicate. So every time they Baker acted him, they'd treat the drug problem, but not the mental, and then he would come home and then start back with the drug. So he never got help. And his wife ended up divorcing him. And I don't know what's going on with him now. Hey, Tricia. Oh, that's sad. That's really sad. Hey, baby. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. What do you want, Belle?
Your direct examination, Mr. Galindo.
Thank you. Before we do that, I would like to mark as the defense exhibit next in order, which I believe is G, a copy of the cassette of the YouTube album Joshua Tree, which contains the excerpt which was played yesterday in court.
I take it there's no objection to its admissibility since it's already been played to be admitted. You are offering it, I take it.
Yes, Your Honor. At this point, I might as well move into evidence previous defense exhibits. I believe we already moved into evidence defense exhibits A, B, and C. We will now move the remaining exhibits into evidence. That would be defense D, E, F, and G, I believe.
With the exception of C, as my understanding is C was one of the reports prepared by Don Hickman or Carol Roos. I have not withdrawn my objection to that yet, and I'm going to review it more carefully. Perhaps we could agree that it be, that we argue that issue.
Summary document that he referred to regarding the letters, et cetera. I haven't seen it, so I can't rule on it. So let's just defer the admission of that document
That's fine.
until she's ready. And there being no objection to D, E, and F, they will be received as well as A, B, and G.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Dr. Dietz, when we last were in session, I believe you had testified about the significance of some of the songs of the U2 album to Robert Bardo. Do you recall that portion of your testimony?
Yes.
Would you continue with your observations?
On the first day of the examination, he had told me and demonstrated for me a song that he'd written about Rebecca Schaeffer. And he said that the song, quote, brings out the pain of what I felt, end quote. He then told me that if anyone says something offensive to him in any manner, that he can't stop thinking about it. He becomes preoccupied with any slight or insult. He talked about a habit that he had years ago and that he still has of trying to put himself to sleep by rocking his head back and forth, which he described as trying to induce a sort of stupor. And as he demonstrated it to me, it was a side-to-side motion of the head that looked rather vigorous for one trying to sleep, but he said he uses it nightly. He then told me that he was offended about the way that the inmates talk about women because the other inmates refer to women as bitches, and whenever they do, he feels panicked because he thinks that they're talking about Rebecca Schaeffer, and it upsets him to hear them speak that way. In January of 1989, he said he had a fight with his brother Jeff, and that the source of that fight had been that Jeff had erased telephone numbers Robert had recorded for a band that he had hoped to put together. He then told me about Samantha Smith, mentioning that when he was 13, he had talked to her on the telephone and also talked to her mother, Jane Smith, that one of the reasons that he had dropped out of school was when Samantha Smith had died. He said that, quote, she seemed just like Rebecca, end quote. He mentioned the incident I referred to yesterday in which he was looking at a postcard from Samantha Smith the very evening that he later heard on the radio of her death. He had received her telephone number, or rather her family's, from directory assistants and had called there twice, found them friendly to him. He wrote to her and she sent him a card back. He made his trip to Maine, and upon returning, he called her on January 1st of 1984, he said, for the new year. It was on December 9, 1983, that with money stolen from his mother, he took a Trailways bus and went to Portland, Maine. He said that because he was so low on funds, he was starving on the way. He mentioned having collected newspaper and magazine articles about Samantha Smith before he had written to her, and said he had begun that collecting in July of 1983. it was 4 to 5 months after he had received the postcard from her that he first pursued her physically and tried to visit. He then recounted the story of being outside the foster home where he tried to stick his veins with a pen to get the blood to gush out so that he would fall asleep.
Excuse me, but the witness seems to be referring to something, and I don't know what he's referring to in this
I
testimony.
can clear this up. I believe that he was testifying yesterday as to his handwritten notes on the first interview, not the typewritten notes in reference
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm now on page 17 of what begins with the label Robert Bardo, September 23, 1991, LA County Jail.
May I ask if the witness has a typed version of those, because his handwriting is very difficult for me to read.
I'll ask them. Do you have a typewritten?
No, Your Honor, I don't.
No.
These pages are not numbered.
Are yours numbered?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let's make sure that she has an exact Xerox copy of Dr. Bardo's handwritten notes.
Full counsel may approach to examine the handwritten notes he's referring to.
This is the wrong day. This is day 2. It's another set of notes.
I don't have any others.
Yes, I handed all of these notes to someone in Mr. Galendo's office to deliver to you yesterday.
Were these not the?
This is one piece of that.
It would appear, Your Honor, that I do not have the complete set of the doctor's handwritten notes. This is the handwritten notes that I received. I have right here. That's all I have. And you're referring to notes that I have not received.
Simultaneously, I handed for Xeroxing this, which you have been referring to, this, which you're holding, and these other things as well.
I understand, Doctor, but you handed those notes not to me.
That's right.
I thought I had a picture of Travis when he had long hair, but I can't find it. His wasn't super, super long, but it was longer.
So, I suggest what we do. May I have just one? How many pages are we talking about?
On this, about 35 pages. And did you receive these? Another 5.
No, what I have is right here. As far as handwritten notes, this is it.
Well, let's take a additional break. Okay, let's do that.
Is that the last page?
That's the last page of what I have.
Yeah, I suggest further counsel. Would you agree to take
Please.
Could we take a short 5-minute break to sort this out?
Yeah, all right. She's entitled, as you know.
No,
See,
I agree.
notes is refreshing his recollection with, so let's do it. All right, 5-minute recess. Let me inquire whether council have received of the yesterday's session.
There is a transcript on table.
All right, quick. All right, let's get in whatever time is left. You may proceed, Mr. Galindo.
Could you continue, please, Dr. Dietz?
My peak is a few people, but somebody apparently took my transcript of yesterday's proceedings. Since it's being televised, it makes no difference, but, all right, go ahead.
Robert told me that he had aborted that visit to Samantha Smith in Maine because he was tired and wanted to go home, but then explained in some further detail what had actually happened. He said, quote, "I was living in kind of a fantasy world. I never had a girlfriend, and I thought I could see anyone. I didn't see anything wrong with it," end quote. Then he explained that he'd actually gone to the police and asked them for a ride to Augusta, Maine, which was about 5 miles from Manchester, where she lived, and seemed embarrassed as he told me, quote, "I naively thought the police would drive me there," end quote. That was when the police determined he was missing from Tucson and called his parents. After he called Samantha Smith on January 1st, 1984 from Tucson, he mailed her all of the clippings, quote, to forget about her, end quote, and said that he did not think about her again until the day she died, August 25, 1985. He had written her a few times after her initial response, but she only responded once. I then asked him about Mrs. Morris and his relationship to her. And he told me that he had tried to get attention from her and from Mr. Hickman, that Mrs. Morris eventually told him not to come to the school anymore. He said that he had written the letters because Mr. Hickman told him to do that for catharsis. He said, quote, I kind of had a crush on her because she talked to me nicely, end quote. He did want to keep in contact with her after school, that is after the school year ended, and he became upset at her policy of not giving out her home telephone number.
Okay, what's the difference between Buckeyes and peanut butter balls? I had this discussion the other day with somebody. Somebody said Buckeyes was just the northern version and peanut butter balls was the southern version. And then somebody said Buckeyes, you leave peanut butter balls you completely cover with chocolate, and the Buckeyes you left a little like tiny circle of peanut butter showing. But I have not made any in a really long time, and I'm going to make them this year for Christmas. I want to make... Oh, I need to add that to my list. My mom used to make... She called them peanut butter pinwheels, but it's potato candy. And I didn't know that. Oh, okay. You just leave the end uncovered. Okay, that's the only difference. Okay. My mom used to make... She called them peanut butter pinwheels, but I found out since that they're potato candy. The dough is made from mashed potatoes. It's mashed potatoes and powdered sugar, and then you lay it out flat, and then you cover it with peanut butter, and then you roll it up and cut it into slices, and then you put it in the, I think it's the fridge, not the freezer. And it is so good. To me, it tastes like, the white chocolate Reese cups. That's what it tastes like to me. And I've not had it. I've never made it. I've not had it. My mom died in 90. I've not had it since my mom was alive. So if I don't forget again, I'm going to try to make that this year. I keep forgetting. Yeah, it doesn't taste like potato at all. Yeah, the peanut butter balls have the powdered sugar and the peanut butter. It's basically the same thing, I think. It just like on a Buckeye, you just leave the little... What is a Buckeye? Is a Buckeye a real thing? I don't know what a Buckeye is. To me, it looks like a chestnut. Okay, that makes sense. Because the people that we were having the discussion, semi-argument with, they were from Ohio. Because it was on a live stream, and we were talking about Christmas recipes, and they were talking about peanut butter balls, and my friend from Ohio was like, "Those are Buckeyes." I was like, "What's a Buckeye?" And she had actually just made some, and she held it up to the camera, and she goes, "This is a Buckeye," and it had like the little spot of peanut butter still showing. The Ohio State Buckeyes. Okay. I stand corrected. All right. Oh, cool. I'm making pecan pies. My pecan pies are not, you know how pecan pies have like, they're the sweet, sticky, corn syrupy filling, and then they just have pecans over the top? That's not how I make mine. Mine doesn't have corn syrup. It's not like a little bit of pecans and then sweet jelly stuff. It's all pecans through the whole thing with like brown sugar, and it's not as sweet, it's more pecans. I love it. I love it like that. I don't like the other kind. Okay. Sorry. That was my squirrel for today, I guess. Food talk.
Yet he said that it was Mrs. Morris who helped him break away from Ed, who at that time was influencing him to shoplift and controlling him and so on. I asked him then to talk to me about his relationship with Ed, and he said that he had first openly begun to talk to Ed in November of '87 because he thought Ed had changed after becoming a student at the University of Arizona. We talked about his writing from age 13 or 14 about Ed beating him with a ruler, and it was then that he volunteered without prompting that he had never been sexually abused. I then asked him if what he meant by Ed forcing him to massage him the massage parlor way meant to manipulate Ed's penis with his hand, and he denied that that had ever occurred. He said that he and Ed shared a common interest in action movies such as Rambo. Robert then said that he had told his father about his obsession and his plan to go to Los Angeles to see Rebecca Schaeffer, and he recounted an incident on the way back from seeing the film Lethal Weapon 2, in which he told his father that he was going to go to LA and visit Rebecca Schaeffer, and his father said to him, "You're not like that guy John Hinckley. You're not going to try to do what that guy Hinckley did." At which point Robert assured his father that he was not going to try to do what Hinckley did, by which Robert had in mind that he was not interested in the president. He then talked to me about his pursuit of Debbie Gibson. He said that he had gone to New York City in about April of 1988, partly to see Debbie Gibson, the singer, but that he was not that interested in Debbie Gibson, quote, because her nose and teeth are all messed up, end quote. He said he saw her video but didn't fall for her. He found her cute, quote, but it was just a small little thing, end quote. And at several occasions during the day, he distinguished his passing interest in Debbie Gibson from his love of a lifetime in Rebecca Schaeffer. He said that when he first went to New York, he made his first stop, the Dakota, the apartment building where Chapman killed John Lennon, and that he had known the address, and he told the taxi driver from the airport to take him there. He was able to give me details about how much he paid for his tickets, that he flew by United Airlines on a reduced fare, that he had read an interview or seen an interview, I don't know which, with Debbie Gibson, in which Debbie Gibson had encouraged her fans to write to her and said that she would answer every one of them. He wanted to get an autographed picture from her, and so he wrote her a letter. I don't know if she responded. He went from the Dakota to Merrick, Long Island, where he had read that Debbie Gibson lived, and once there he couldn't find a hotel, so he stayed at the high school that he believed she had attended, because in the small print on one of her album covers there was a dedication to the high school. So he went to that high school and slept in some kind of covered area that he found by the high school. The next day he went into Manhattan, feeling that he'd seen all he wanted to of Long Island. And he initially gave me an incoherent account that involved a Catholic church And the time sequence got quite distorted, but sorting out what happened there, my understanding is that he had been in Manhattan, was on his way to a location to rearrange his travel plans when he came upon a Catholic church. He thought on Park Avenue. He thought the name might be St. Bartholomew's, but wasn't sure. And that he went inside that church, and then later he returned to details of it. He recalled that the album from Debbie Gibson was called Out of the Blue, and it specifically mentioned Calhoun High School. So he asked people there where the high school was. He was cold and found a storage space in the school to sleep in. He talked about having gone initially in Manhattan to Rockefeller Center and described with considerable joy ice skating at Rockefeller Center and said, quote, "I had more fun at that than looking for Debbie Gibson," end quote. He changed his ticket on United Airlines to return earlier to Tucson, but on the way there, it was that he went to the church. He said it was set up for homeless people, and he went into that church because he had read that Rebecca Schaeffer said she had gone into a church in New York City that had pictures of the saints, but he didn't think this was the same church because he didn't see the pictures of the saints, and it looked like it was for homeless people. He mentioned then having written another letter to Debbie Gibson from jail, asking for her autograph, and expressed concern that someone had thought that it was a death threat. He recounted then the 1987 first trip to see Rebecca Schaeffer, and described that after he took the sleeping pills, after Jack Egger drove him back to his hotel, he had gone, upon awakening, to a Catholic church where he took communion and talked afterwards to a priest who told him that he shouldn't have taken communion because he's not a Catholic. He took a prayer card from some religious literature available at the church, and that prayer card he described as one that allows you to pray to a certain saint and get whatever you want. And he kept that card with him and carried it with him on the day of the shooting, and considered it one of his more significant possessions. He said that card had been in his bag or his pocket, and later we established that it was in his pocket. He was afraid that after his apprehension, and again, the time sequence is all out of sync because this is the order he told me these things. After his apprehension, he was concerned that Rebecca Schaeffer's boyfriend might shoot him in court. He said he also became angry that his, quote, private thing, end quote, with Rebecca Schaeffer is being made fun of by people who have no involvement in the matter. I asked him what he thought his relationship was with her now, and he said, quote, "Just a fan, an obsessed fan, I guess," end quote. He estimated that he'd written 40 letters to her, which were repetitious because he wasn't sure that she was receiving the letters, and he wanted to make certain that the message eventually got through. He did write to her at 120 North Sweetser after he obtained that address, but he never received an answer to those letters. He then mentioned the cover story on Mark David Chapman that People magazine published in 1988, and commented that he didn't ever think that his case was going to be that big. At that point, he again told me about what he thinks the nature of the problem is of those who stalk celebrities, and said, quote, "If I was to give my advice to a celebrity, I'd say they shouldn't ever write directly, and they shouldn't say they live in Encino, Beverly Hills, and so on." He then gave me examples of public figures in the entertainment industry and what cities he believes they live in because of what's been published in the press, and he listed half dozen or so.
I don't think she has to worry about that anymore after being in Sharknado.
He said, "Why are they doing this? They practically tell where they live. How hard can it be?" He mentioned having told the private investigator that he had seen Rebecca Schaeffer and that he wanted to send her a gift. And Robert said that he told the investigator that she was an actress, and the private investigator mentioned Arthur Jackson to him and told him not to surprise Rebecca Schaeffer and not to scare her. He described having gone to the home of the private investigator and seemed dismayed that at the preliminary hearing the man had said that Robert was never in his home, and described him living across from the Tucson La Conquistador, and described how he found the door, and the man had congratulated him on being able to find it and said most people got confused there. He showed the investigator, Anthony Zinkus, his clipping file concerning Rebecca Schaeffer.
Oh, come on, y'all. That was funny.
And with $100 that he had obtained by selling his CDs, paid a deposit and owed $150 when he got the address. Mr. Zinkus told him, according to Robert, that he would check bank records, check with contacts in the police department, contact the DMV, contact Pacific Bell, or track the parents and trace the call after setting up a pretext to find out where Rebecca Schaeffer lived. Robert said that when he finally delivered the address, Mr. Zinkus put down the blinds and locked the door as he handed him the piece of paper. He then switched to the day of the shooting and returned to a point he'd left off earlier, and described having fired, and said that after he fired the weapon, he pointed the gun at his right temple, hoping that he would fall on Miss Schaeffer, and if he fell, but that the gun wouldn't fire. He described the weapon as having a 4-inch barrel and a blued finish with wood grips. He then fled the scene, and we get into this in much greater detail later, and while fleeing, threw the bag containing the gun and letters into a dumpster. He said that the bag and the things that had been in his hand were bloodied, and that he saw blood on his sleeve.
It's a movie about tornadoes picking up sharks and throwing them all over the place and killing people with flying sharks coming out of tornadoes. It's a horrible movie. And it had a bunch of sequels that were equally as horrible.
Which led him to think, as he said, quote, "I was amazed. It was human blood. Rebecca Schaeffer's. She was a human being," end quote.
I think this may be an appropriate time to take a room recess. 1:30, ladies and gentlemen.
Dr. Dees, you were, when we last left, discussing your examination on the first day, if I recall, of Robert Bardo. So would you please continue?
Yes. Mr. Bardo told me that as he ran from the scene, he felt panicked.
The tape is running.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was
And he threw his shirt on a rooftop, and also threw the holster that had been in the bag on a rooftop. He mentioned then that he had brought with him on the trip to Los Angeles a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, and said that he had purchased that book and read it twice to try to find out how it had made Mark David Chapman kill John Lennon, based on the news accounts that the book had something to do with the murder, and that despite having read it twice, he couldn't figure out what it had to do with it. I shared with him that I'd read it twice for the same purpose and couldn't figure it out either, and mentioned to him that John Hinckley had also had a copy of Catcher in the Rye in his luggage at the hotel where he had stayed. He asked me if I'd interviewed Hinckley, and I told him I had, and he asked, did he seem normal like me? He said that he had brought the book, Catcher in the Rye, for the purpose of protecting the treasures that he'd brought with him. Namely, in a Ziploc bag, he had the card from Rebecca Schaeffer that she had signed, the card sent him by Samantha Smith that she had signed, the ticket to My Sister Sam sent him by Audiences Unlimited, and that those three items, and there may have been a fourth, I can't recall offhand, but I'm sure I'll come to later, were his most valued possessions. And to protect them, he placed them in a Ziploc bag and had put that inside a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. He minimized at that point the significance of the book for any other reason and just said it was the handiest book to put these things in to protect them. He then mentioned that in his second trip to Los Angeles in pursuit of Rebecca Schaeffer in July of 1987, he had sought her based on information he received from TV Guide and 17 magazine, which had said that Ms. Schaeffer drove a Volkswagen convertible. So he then walked all over the Hollywood Hills on the Hollywood side, looking for, quote, a floor through with a great view of the Hollywood Hills, end quote, apparently paraphrasing something that appeared in one of the articles. One of the articles had also mentioned that Ms. Schaeffer liked to work in a garden and that a man upstairs helped her with the garden. So for that reason, he looked for an apartment that had at least 2 stories. He then went back to a discussion of the first trip in about May of 1987 in pursuit of Ms. Schaeffer and said that he had seen Jack Egger. He talked about going to the Catholic Church. He referred to staying at the Hotel Howard on Whitney near Hollywood Boulevard. He said that he had stayed there from Saturday to Thursday as his base of operations as he looked for Ms. Schaeffer, and then told me of having gone to a florist to get a dozen silk roses, and he wished to send those silk roses and a teddy bear to Rebecca Schaeffer at the studio where he thought she worked, along with a letter and a photograph of himself, and that the security personnel had refused to accept these gifts and gave them back to him. He was confused at that point, or at least I became confused as to what he was saying was the order in which these things had happened. But he mentioned having become angered when he found that the florist had set up a floral arrangement instead of silk flowers. So I think he had flowers delivered rather than having taken the flowers himself. At some point that same day, he called the Burbank studios, and it was then that Jack Egger told him to come over to the studio. He said that after meeting with Mr. Egger, he was given a tour of the grounds by one of the guards, and that it was a guard who gave him the tour of the grounds of Burbank Studios, who told Robert Bardo that My Sister Sam wasn't actually filmed at Burbank Studios, but was filmed at Soundstage 29 of the Burbank Studios Ranch. After making his suicide attempt that night and going to the Catholic Church the next day, he went to the Burbank Studios Ranch, where he tried to get into Soundstage 29, and the security guard told him, quote, "We've been told to tell you that we don't want you around here," end quote. Now, this is Robert Bardo quoting the guard. Mr. Bardo said that he thought Rebecca Schaeffer was responsible for this, and he became angry at her because of that message. And then at that point began seeking her around the Hollywood Hills, which he found quiet and secluded. He also mentioned having noticed that he could have climbed the fence and hidden near Soundstage 29 had he wished to. On his second trip to Los Angeles in around July of 1987, he took the bus, and it was on this trip that he was mugged in Hollywood near the Capitol Records building by his account. He said that he was carrying a brown paper bag when 2 men approached him offering drugs for sale. He showed one of the men a magazine photograph of Rebecca Schaeffer, and one of the men took off with his Walkman containing a U2 tape entitled War. The other man then grabbed the binoculars that belonged to his father and ran away with the binoculars. But that did not concern him quite so much as it might otherwise have, because he had retained the photograph of Rebecca Schaeffer, which was what he valued the most. He said that he was then thinking of the Bee Gees song, "How Do You Mend a Broken Heart?" And he was evidently ashamed as he described this experience to me, saying, quote, "I felt like I wasn't a man enough to defend myself because I was too dazed out," end quote. He said he walked all day looking for Rebecca Schaeffer's house. I take it he had been walking all day at the time this incident happened. He slept that night in the men's room of a Taco Bell that had been left unlocked in Burbank near a record store. And I'm not sure if it's that day or another day, or at least at this point I wasn't sure, when he went to the entrance to the Burbank Studios ranch, so that hoping to catch a glimpse of Rebecca Schaeffer. On this occasion, he waited to see her near Soundstage 29. He said that he had called Warner Brothers that day to ask if my sister Sam was filming, and they had told him that it was filming and the approximate time that they'd be filming. So he went to Soundstage 29, where he recalled having been told it was filmed, and he watched a red light that he said was lit, that he thought meant that filming was in progress, and that he stood there for 4 hours watching the red light and waiting for the occasion when that would be over and she would emerge. And that after waiting for 4 hours, just as the light went off and people began to emerge from that building, he suddenly had an inexplicable thirst and walked across the street to Carl's Jr. to get a soft drink, and returned to see a Volkswagen convertible leave that he thought was Rebecca Schaeffer. So he had missed her. He never understood why he had suddenly felt thirsty and left. He then told me that, I asked him, what would you have done if you'd been there when she emerged? And he said that he thought that if he'd been there, he would have stopped the car. And I said, well, then what would have happened? And he said, quote, "I was still pissed off from last time, and I was armed with a knife." He described the knife as having had a fixed blade. It was a kitchen knife. He showed me its dimensions and said he kept it in his pocket without a sheath. And he continued saying, "And if she was mean to me, I'd have done to her what Arthur Jackson did to Teresa Saldana," end quote.
Now, did that have some significance as far as how he related that incident? And as he discussed how he inexplicably became thirsty and felt the need to go and obtain a drink from the Carl's Jr.
Yes, I then shared with him, having seen the same phenomenon in other cases, and described to him how Ralph Now had done the same thing in his pursuit of one of the celebrities he was after, how he had saved up his money and made the trip, arranged to go to a public appearance, got himself a suit, stood outside waiting to see the object of his attention arrive. And just before she did, he inexplicably went inside to take his seat and missed her. And then he waited and waited for her appearance, having traveled around the world looking for her. And just before she appeared on stage, he got up and went out for refreshments and something to drink, and he missed her. And that I wondered if that had to do with his uncertainty of what he wanted to have happen. Now, what I was thinking, and what I interpret this to be, is evidence of the ambivalence I referred to earlier. In other words, he has two conflicting emotions: wanting to approach her, be with her. On the other hand, being terrified of approaching her and being with her because she might not think well of him, or something bad might happen. He might kill her, he might love her. It's not clear what will happen, and that's a source of conflict and frightening. And so I think that that's why he drifted across the street, and thirst was a means of explaining to himself why he went for a drink.
That's it. You go on.
He then went back to Union Station and took a Trailways bus to Tucson. The knife he had with him on that occasion had been brought from home. He had not had any weapon on the first trip, nor did he have a weapon on the third trip. Then he told me about the fourth trip, of course, in July of 1989, and said that when he went to Ms. Schaeffer's door on the second occasion that morning, he rang the doorbell 3 times. For some reason, he then changed the subject and talked about the name Guns N' Roses, the rock group that he'd mentioned previously, and said that he likes that name because the duality of the name characterizes his shifting feelings toward Rebecca Schaeffer, and said that he noticed that his work reflected his shifting emotions toward her, that when he was feeling affection and love toward her, he'd be working more effectively and pleasantly than when he was feeling desperate toward her. He said, quote, "If I had to forfeit my life for it, I would, but I just had to see her," end quote. He wanted her to know who he was in case he wrote again, and said, quote, "Everything else in my life was so dull compared to that," end quote. He then described in greater detail the third trip in September of '87, where he stayed for less than a day. He said he'd traveled by bus to Los Angeles and returned by Northwest Airlines. On this trip, he went by the Burbank Studios ranch looking for her, but he did not go on the grounds. He said he walked the entire way to the Hollywood Hills looking for an apartment fitting the description of hers. He went to the Burbank airport and flew to Tucson. He never thought of looking west of Mulholland for her. He returned extremely
Doctor, I need to take an important phone call. Everyone stay where they are. No, my apologies. That was the presiding judge on scheduling in this case. All right.
Could you please continue where you left off, Doctor?
Yes, the next area that Mr. Bardo discussed with me was in response to my asking him what had actually prompted his various trips to Los Angeles. Why did he travel when he did? He told me that the first trip had been prompted at that particular time by a cover story on Rebecca Schaeffer in TV Guide in May of 1987 that had followed on the heels of a cover story in 17 in March of 1987, and an interview by Edwin Miller in the column known as In the Spotlight in 17 magazine in May 1987. That when the My Sister Sam show was featured on the cover of TV Guide in May of '87, he was moved to make that first trip. So it was that combination of appearances in the print medium. The second trip, he said, was prompted at that particular time by his having been watching the TV show, taping almost every episode. He regretted having missed taping the 1986 Toronto show, whatever that is, and the 1987 Thanksgiving parade, because he didn't have a VCR at that time. He said that he watched every episode repeatedly, but there were episodes that were his favorites, and the favorites he would watch 10 or more times. The ones that were not his favorite, he thought he averaged watching about 5 times a piece. The third visit, he said, was prompted by an August 1987 interview in TV Guide. And he quoted from that article, as he did from the others. I don't know if his quotations are accurate because I don't have copies of the originals, but it appeared as though he had put to memory at least certain lines. And he quoted from it, quote, life was too comfortable, so she left home at 16, end quote. He then said, quote, "The way she talked, it sounded like she was available," end quote. That article mentioned that she lived in the Hollywood Hills, and so back he came. He said he had also taped some appearances by Tiffany and by Debbie Gibson, and mentioned having once been in the front row of the Celebrity Theater in Phoenix when Tiffany performed. He noticed her security and recounted an incident in which she had looked at him and directed a gesture to him during the performance. She apparently, by his description, had, in accord with the lyrics of a song, pointed to him and then engaged in something like a hug that he described as having hugged me. I don't know if it was a symbolic hug or whether she actually touched him. I simply don't know. But he was delighted by that encounter. Then he said, quote, "As soon as she knew who I was, I'd keep writing her and she'd write back. And then if I straightened my life out, I'd come to LA and hopefully ask her out on a date." And he gave a sheepish laugh. This was his description of what he expected would happen with Rebecca Schaeffer. He said that he wanted to court her and that he expected she'd be friendly. He thought that as she got to know him, she'd find him to be cute and witty, and that she'd become increasingly attracted to him. He was pretty sure this would happen, but he wasn't certain. He'd get upset if anything challenged these expectations, quote, "because I didn't know how else to live my life. I didn't have anything else," end quote. At the same time, he had fears of what would happen in her career, and a phrase he used a couple times to describe these fears was that he was afraid she would turn into, quote, "a screen whore," end quote. And this expectation or fear came in part from the film Scenes from a Class Struggle. He then said, quote, "If she was a whore, God was going to appoint me to punish her," end quote. These were thoughts that he said he had in 1987 to 1988. That set of beliefs caused him to be required, he said, to find out what kind of roles she was doing. Now, I tried to pursue this issue about being appointed by God, and he, by and large, tried to minimize that and to say, well, maybe it wasn't God, maybe it was just my conscience, maybe it was me, it was in my head, it couldn't have been God. Sometimes he gives me advice, but the advice is too good to be from me, it can't be me, but then it couldn't be God, and some confusion about this. I believe this to be the same phenomenon that was recorded in 1983 or 84 as hallucinations, but I think he has a different relationship to these internal experiences now than he did in 1984. And he never came out more forthrightly to speak of a God-given mission than he did in that single quotation.
In any event, though, you tied this piece of information from Robert Bardo in with the earlier experience, the earlier reports, medical psychiatric reports of hallucinations, correct?
Yes. He then said that in 1989, he wrote a letter repeatedly to Rebecca Schaeffer that he never mailed, in which he said, "I'm going to kill you, bitch." He never mailed it because he was cautious not to threaten her, knowing that she would tell the police if he were to threaten her. He then complained about the tabloids making certain public figures seem like they're accessible. He mentioned by name several. He described Mary Hart as an airhead, and I think was particularly concerned about a time that he said that Mary Hart had interviewed Rebecca Schaeffer. He talked about the significance to him of the lyrics to a song by Guns N' Roses in which the words appear, quote, "You can taste the bright lights, but you won't get them for free," end quote. It's from a song called Welcome to the Jungle, or an album called Welcome to the Jungle, that prompts many of his thoughts. At that point, he told me that he'd thrown water in the vent system in his cell because he thought the prosecutors had bugged his cell the day before the interview. He thought that Rebecca Schaeffer was unfaithful to him, he said, and then used uncharacteristically some obscene language to describe what he thought she was doing to him, and expressed his concern that she might be like Tracy Lords, and said that that thought was prompted by her having referred to her boyfriend in the August 1987 TV guide. He said, quote, "Rebecca was obsessed with Hollywood and I was obsessed with Rebecca," end quote.
Tracy Lords is a porn star.
I asked him again about what significance religion had in relation to
I don't know why I know that, but I know that.
the shooting. And he began to talk to me about his post-arrest interest in Christianity, and I redirected him to what religion had to do with the shooting at the time. And he told me not about a mission from God, but rather that he thought that Rebecca might be getting into New Age religions based on something he'd read about her, which meant that her God was Hollywood. He then spoke of her having been in bed with Ray Sharkey in scenes from Class Struggle, to which his comment was, quote, "She was pushing it," end quote. He mentioned glimpsing her in Radio Days, where apparently she kissed a black man, and said that he was upset by that scene, and mentioned that he had a book on the making of the film. Then he reported to me that he had contacted Triad to find out where Ms. Schaeffer was, and was told that she was in Rome and would be there until.
She became a regular actress later. I don't know how I know that. I had an ex-boyfriend that used to make me watch. Like, if I tried to leave, this was back when I was in my early 20s and I was stupid. I was young and stupid. He'd say, "If you go out that door, you're never coming back." So I would stay and watch it with him. I didn't like it. He made me. But I don't know if that's why I know her name. I just know that. I have no idea.
Mid-July 1989, quote.
I'm sorry, sir. May we interrupt? We need to change reporters for the
Triad reportedly told him that Rebecca Schaeffer would return from Rome in mid-July 1989, and his response to that was, quote, "So the timing was perfect because that's when I was going to have money, her address, and everything," end quote. He had never spoken to Rebecca Schaeffer on the phone, and I showed him a copy of a page from an appointment book that came to me unmarked, but I surmised might have been Rebecca Schaeffer's appointment book, that had the name Robert Bardo and a telephone number that was very close to his, with just 2 digits transposed. I asked him if that were his or if he knew what it was, and he didn't recognize it. And I told him what I had surmised, that it had belonged to her, and he became very excited about this and lit up and was joyous and became very happy, and then suddenly asked, "Is this a trick? Is this a psychiatric trick? Is this a test you're giving me?" And became suspicious as to whether I was misleading him as to the source of that.
And for the record, Your Honor, I believe that was previously marked Defense Exhibit A. There was a stipulation that was entered into in reference to that piece of evidence.
As I say, I didn't know really what the source was, and I told him, I don't know, but I think that's where it must have come from. I couldn't see any other explanation. He then told me about having seen a Spanish magazine, a Spanish language magazine, that had a picture of a female named Tatiana, whom he said looked like Rebecca Schaeffer. And it was here that he asked me whether she was still alive and being kept somewhere secretly as a security precaution. And that it was just a pretense that she was dead, because he thought that would be a good idea and that would be good and he'd understand that. And he asked to see the autopsy results, at which point I assured him that she was indeed dead, that she had been killed by a gunshot wound. And I believe persuaded to the extent one could Mr. Bardo that she was indeed dead, whereupon he began hyperventilating, sobbing and crying, and it became necessary to calm him and divert his attention. He then talked about Tom Clancy being his favorite writer. Talked about reading a lot, but said that since 13 he has felt that something's changed about him. I asked him about hearing voices because I'd read about them in the psychiatric records, and he said that he did not have hallucinations. He said he had told the psychiatrist in Tucson about hearing voices, but that it's not hallucinations that he has in his view. He said he felt like the Holy Spirit tells him to write letters against the advice of you, his lawyer, and then described a voice in my head. That was, quote, voice in my head, end quote, which addresses him as Robert. That voice directs him to do what he described as foolish things, like search for Rebecca, call a private investigator, and so on. He said this is, quote, all in my head. It's just my conscience or something, end quote. He sometimes thought that was God and said, quote, I thought it was God who guided me to Rebecca, end quote. He continues to think, at least in part, that God guided him to Rebecca in 1989 because it was destiny for him to see her. At the same time, he always readily accepts responsibility for doing this himself and says that there's nothing wrong with him and that he doesn't hallucinate. He said, quote, I was assuming the worst, so I pulled the gun and shot her, end quote, which was an allusion to his having indicated that he was interpreting her demeanor at the time of the shooting as some kind of insensitivity or arrogance or hostility toward him. It is that he says he was assuming. He described episodes of anxiety in which he feels as though he's going to die. He said he had pain in his chest on the right side. He showed me where. Said he gets tightness in his back and that his heart beats faster when he has these episodes. He'd sought medical attention for them on more than one occasion. It's happened since he's been in protective custody. He thought he would die at the same age as Rebecca Schaeffer, and when that date passed and he had calculated that September 14th would have been the date on which his death would have corresponded to her death, he expected to die and that he would be born again. And when he was born again, he would go back to 1970 and the cycle would start over. He said, quote, maybe I was stuck in a cycle that I couldn't escape. I felt like fatalism, end quote. And he described further to me how that would work, that he'd be born, he'd live a certain amount of time, and on the exact date at which he had lived the same length of time that Rebecca Schaeffer had lived, he would die, be born again. The same thing would be happening to her, and their cycles would continue to repeat as destiny. He was suspicious that his obsession with Rebecca Schaeffer might be abnormal. So he read about what the press by that time had come to call star stalkers to see if he was like them. He assured me that he had never thought of harming Rebecca Schaeffer's family and had never thought of harming Pam Dauber. He told me he hadn't been on any medication since October of 1990. He mentioned having gone to the library to research Rebecca Schaeffer and having sought information about her on microfiche at the University of Arizona. He told me about keeping a diary, which his brother Ed had burned. In that diary, he talked about Rebecca Schaeffer and trips to find her, though that wasn't the predominant theme of the diary. And he thinks that his brother and father might have read it or found it after his arrest, and that they might know something about it from their exposure to it before they destroyed it. He said that he'd like to help get the message out to prevent others from doing the same thing, and then described how he identified more with Mark David Chapman than others he'd read about, because Chapman had a sense, quote, of feeling like a loser, feeling frustrated in life, end quote. Also on that day, I had occasion to ask him about a number of mental status questions. Some of those are reflected in the notes, and there's some other details that I worked into my diagnostic formulation and had in my type notes. But that was, by and large, what occurred on the first day of the examination.
Now, you mentioned that there was a second day of examination.
Yes, there was.
And that was videotaped, was it not?
Yes.
And the record should reflect that we do have the videotape equipment prepared, and a copy of the videotape was given to Ms. Clark yesterday. 2 copies, actually.
Okay, last night. I haven't seen them,
Last night.
but they're being copied now, and I'll be able to see them.
Mr. Bardo, you're going to do the videotape now?
Yes.
How much do you intend to show the videotape? It's been estimated to last approximately 2 hours.
I was going to ask Dr. Dietz to control the flow of the videotapes and to stop it wherever he felt it was important for him to.
Well, let's approach again then without the recorder, and then if it's necessary, we'll have the recorder.
Dr. Dietz, before we get into playing the tape right now, we have elected to play the tape, but I would like you to make a few preliminary comments then about that event, that interview, that examination.
Well, everything that occurred is shown on the tape because I tried to begin the tape running as soon as he was brought to the room. I'd been there a time and had a chance to set the equipment up. Mr. Bardo's demeanor on this day was rather different from it had been on the first day. On this occasion, he kept himself much better on track, and I expected to be asking him questions and eliciting various parts of the story. It's my preference to get an entire intact story from a defendant without interruption or guidance. As close to the event as possible, which I think is the ideal way to conduct an evaluation. But he had been pressured enough to tell me about the crime in pieces on the first day. I had not pursued much of it because I wanted a recording of the entire account he gave of the crime. And to my surprise, he was able to answer the first question I asked in great detail and without interruption. There's no editing of this, and by and large, he talks for an hour and a half or so without my having to say a thing, and gives a complete account of his relationship as I asked him to, as I asked the question.
In view of that, if we're going to have an hour and a half of uninterrupted narrative, I would like to take the recess now and proceed as we discuss at the sidebar.
That's fine.
All right, thank you. We have a 10-minute recess.
Oh, sweet child of mine. Wow, 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 sweet child of mine.
Dr. Dietz, I know that you have not yet fully relayed all of your information and all of the materials which you relied upon. However, I was wondering if we could, if I could ask you some questions concerning your evaluation and diagnosis at this time. Could you tell us what is a differential diagnosis?
Differential diagnosis is the procedure by which a clinician considers the possible diagnoses that might account for observed signs and symptoms and attempts to distinguish among the various possibilities and arrive at a conclusion as to what is the correct diagnosis.
Did you engage in a differential diagnosis in this case?
Yes, I did.
Would you share that with us?
Yes, I considered a variety of possibilities for what might account for what I learned of Robert Bardo's mental condition from all of the sources of information available to me, including the examination. The primary conditions that I considered were first as to whether obsessive compulsive disorder might account for this, because that had been considered early in the first hospitalization, and because it's an obvious thing to consider when someone has what is generally regarded as an obsession. I found that was not an apt diagnosis, because a true obsession, as understood in psychiatry, is a condition in which an individual has intrude upon the mind thoughts that are recognized as unwanted and senseless. The thoughts are regarded as bothersome to the patient, who wishes to be rid of them and who recognizes the irrationality of these thoughts entering the mind. In this instance, Mr. Bardo did not recognize his thoughts about Rebecca Schaeffer or about Samantha Smith or about Mrs. Morris or even fleetingly about Debbie Gibson as being unwanted thoughts. He did not recognize them as being irrational thoughts. He did not recognize them as intruding on his mind, though he did at times recognize that this was interfering with his ability to do other things, that it was perhaps not the healthiest thing for him. And so he did seek to distract himself from those thoughts, and he did seek to put them aside from time to time because of their interference with his other functioning. But he didn't experience them as alien intrusions into the mind. So they did not have the characteristics of a true obsession, nor did any of his behavior have the characteristics of a true compulsion, except perhaps for his picking at his lips, which could be many things and has nothing particularly characteristic about a true compulsion. So I was able to rule out that all of this behavior was accounted for by obsessive compulsive disorder. Secondly, I considered the possibility that the behaviors could be the result of a mood disorder, because he had so often been suicidal, often talked about being depressed, and had some of the signs and symptoms that occur along with mood disorders, particularly depression. And while it is true that he has been depressed, I don't think that that is the primary diagnosis, because he does not meet the criteria currently established for defining and identifying a major depressive illness. And so I do not believe that to be the correct diagnosis. I then considered the possibility that there was an organic problem for the following reasons. First, both Mr. Bardo and his brother Jeff have an unusual appearance. Both Mr. Bardo, that is Robert, and his brother Jeff have a congenital heart defect. In Robert's case, one that was treated surgically at age 3. And and the onset of his lip picking behavior, which is a mild form, I would say, of self-mutilation at around age 10, and his onset of deteriorating mental problems at age 13 led me to be concerned that there is a biological basis, an organic medical problem that could account for that cluster of heart defect, odd appearance, and deteriorating course beginning at age 13, along with the lip picking. I'm not an expert on genetic syndromes, and so I consulted with someone who is, and from the description I was able to give, he did not believe that that met any of the known syndromes, and so I don't know any other way I can explore that possibility. It remains as a possibility, but at least I'm assured that I'm not missing something obvious to experts on genetic syndromes of that kind. I then considered the possibility of another organic basis, namely that this could in part, or rather that some, at least some of these symptoms could be due to a condition known as thyrotoxicosis, in which there is an abnormally high output of thyroid hormones. And that condition is known to be capable of causing someone to have intense dysphoria, anxiety, nervousness, restlessness, sensing their heart beating too rapidly. That is a symptom known as palpitations, chest pain, insomnia, irritability, distractibility, trouble concentrating, and can produce even the more severe symptoms that I'll be describing shortly. And so everything about Mr. Bardo could conceivably be caused by a long-standing thyrotoxicosis. The few things that made me look at that, however, are that he is thin and has been so as long as the records have described his height and weight. And his mother's description of his going about the house wearing only a bathing suit despite it being cold, which doesn't necessarily mean that he felt his body to be too warm, but it would be consistent with what is known as heat intolerance, which traditionally occurs in thyrotoxicosis. Moreover, that hyperactive thyroid condition can cause an odd appearance about the eyes, either protuberance or discoloration. And so that seemed to me that it needed.
That's backwards. That's backwards. Heat intolerance. It's cold, but you're wearing shorts. That's not heat intolerance. Heat intolerance is where it's hot and you can't stand the heat. That, whatever.
Needed to be explored, though it is an unlikely explanation. Because of that hypothesis, I asked last week to have thyroid function studies done, and my understanding is that they were not done, and the results are not currently available to me. And so I can't rule out that possibility as of today. I think it's unlikely, but it's a standard part of a psychiatric workup to do that. When it first occurred to me that might be going on, I checked back to the records and neither hospital had done that. So to this day, one simply doesn't know. Probably not true, but if so, it would be important. On the side of more probable matters, however, I eventually resolved that what seemed to be the two primary possibilities diagnostically are, on the one hand, a condition known as schizotypal personality disorder, spelled SCHIZOTYPAL, or, on the other hand, the condition of schizophrenia. Now, that distinction is one made on the basis of a few particular symptoms. In both of those conditions, there are periods of life, in the case of schizotypal, from the moment of onset throughout life. In the case of schizophrenia, progressively to a point and then fixed by and large throughout life. Symptoms that I have alluded to in part with respect to Robert, namely, excuse me, social
Thyroid can make you skinny too.
isolation and withdrawal, having few, if any, friends, being remote from other people, eating in his room, standing aside at the school lunch recess and not talking to anyone, speaking to no one but the teacher in class, being observed by many people over the years as
It can also make you have a hump on your back. Thyroid can do all kinds of weird stuff.
socially isolated and withdrawn. That's a feature of both those conditions. Secondly, oddness of appearance may occur in both conditions. Often in schizotypal personality disorder, people have an odd facial appearance, odd mannerisms, odd gestures, and the same is true in schizophrenia, that they may have such an odd appearance. Thirdly, in both conditions, there can be eccentricities of thought, odd beliefs, superstitious or magical thinking, a tendency to gravitate toward mystical, spiritual, and artistic pursuits, tendency to be interested in more extreme sorts of political and social issues. And that may occur in both schizotypal and personality disorder and in schizophrenia. Likewise, the oddness of communication. This I haven't yet described in much detail, but it will be evident on the videotape that when Mr. Bardo speaks, he often mumbles. He uses a great deal of filler material, especially the phrase, "you know." And while he manages eventually to make his point, when one actually writes down word for word what it is he is saying, those points often come circuitously. They often involve the beginning of a phrase and then the change to another phrase. And it takes him a bit of time to get from the thought to an expression of it. And while you can generally follow what he's saying, when you try to write it down, you see all of these little derailments and blockages and mistakes in his speech constantly that make it difficult to see exactly what he's saying. That kind of oddness in speech form and the quality of speech, the use of language, occurs both in schizotypal personality disorder and in schizophrenia. That's not a complete list of the characteristics that both conditions share, but even that many alone would be enough to...
No, they use dude. That's why I say dude all the time. It was dude back then.
warrant a diagnosis of at least schizotypal personality disorder when it's associated with impairment in social or occupational functioning. And of course, in his case, the impairment in social functioning is enormous. And the impairment in occupational functioning is probably best understood by remembering that this was a young man who was a straight A student at age 13, at age 14, who by the time he dropped out of school at 16 became so confused.
Excuse me, doctor, I want to listen, but there are things going on. Could you read the last few lines, please? Just start arbitrarily and I'll tell you if we need to back up.
The impairment in occupational functioning is probably best understood by remembering that this was a young man who was a straight A student at age 13, at age 14, who by the time he dropped out of school at age 16 became so confused.
All right, please proceed.
That he was unable to remember counter orders at McDonald's and had to stop working at McDonald's. that likewise at Jack in the Box, he was given a job that had no contact with the public, but rather as a custodian. And in that job that didn't require interacting with the public or remembering orders that people were given, he functioned very well and without any problem. That is not the level of occupational functioning one would have expected for someone of his intellect and of his ability to work hard and do what he was told at the tasks he was assigned. So there was certainly impairment in his occupational and social functioning. Now, in addition to those, there may be some other features that occur in both conditions that are slipping my mind at the moment, but the critical issues that distinguish whether someone suffers schizotypal personality disorder from schizophrenia have to do with three particular psychotic symptoms and with the long-term course. In schizotypal personality disorder, the course is quite fixed, and throughout one's life, the condition remains the same, at least absent treatment, and it's not clear how much effect treatment has in any event. Whereas in schizophrenia, one expects to see deterioration with the progress of time, at least to a certain point. In most cases, although it's been known for a very long time that there's a fraction of the schizophrenic population who do not deteriorate, at least 12% do not and remain stable. I'm not sure how much deterioration there has been for Robert. That is, I don't have enough reliable points of information from the time he was 13 to now to be able to see if this has been relatively stable or to see if it's been a deteriorating course, because what we mean by deterioration has to do with his overall functioning, everything happening with him, and not merely with extreme days in his behavior that obviously are much worse than things he did before, for example. But that doesn't really tell us whether he's on a deteriorating course. The evidence that I've seen makes me think he may well be, and that he has deteriorated, but I'm not certain of it. The other factors that distinguish the two conditions, as I mentioned, are those features that are psychotic symptoms. And here I refer to hallucinations, delusions, and thought disorder. Now, on the subject of psychotic symptoms, it's important to note that in order to be diagnosed as suffering schizophrenia,
He's not deteriorating. Did he shoot Tiffany or Debbie Gibson? No. What do you mean he's not deteriorating?
it is essential that there have been psychotic symptoms at some point in time. One can't be diagnosed with that condition if there has never been a psychotic symptom. On the other hand, in schizotypal personality disorder, while psychotic symptoms are not invariable, they may occur for brief periods of time in the eyes of most authorities, and the diagnostic manual says so as well. So even this isn't a 100% discriminator between the two conditions. Nonetheless, I explore each of those three classes of psychotic symptoms in what I know about Robert Bardo. And on the subject of auditory hallucinations, I've already testified.
Michelle, you watch me do stupid stuff every day. Everything I do should make you feel better about yourself.
As to what the hospital records said when he was 13 and 14. And as I indicated then, I'm persuaded that he had auditory hallucinations at that time. I've spoken here about part of what he told me regarding whether or not he heard voices. And I believe the fairest way to characterize the evidence regarding hallucinations currently is that what he says about hearing God or Satan or being directed by them as having occurred in the last few years, and most importantly, as having occurred in the period immediately preceding his killing Ms. Schaeffer is that he did have some type of mental experience that he experienced then as inside his head rather than as speaking to him from outside, that he would like not to view as hallucinations, but that had some special relation to him. At one point, he told me that it had become.
And why didn't you then type it to me? Because that's a good idea. And I didn't even think of that.
More like friends giving him advice. That is very much the way that some chronic schizophrenic patients talk about their hallucinations. In the acute phase of the illness, they're much more inclined to see them as foreign and to be terribly troubled by hearing voices, to want relief from that, and to see it as alien and tormenting. However, if this goes untreated long enough, then they may come to think of the voices as their companions and friends. And I recall many a bag lady at Johns Hopkins Hospital talking about how she didn't want medication because every time she takes it, it takes her friends away. And that's a reference to these eventually tolerated internal voices. What he's told me about his experiences leads me to believe that's probably what's going on, that he's had chronic hallucinations and basically tries to keep them in their place and isn't troubled by them, despite some conflicting advice and the fact that they sometimes tell him to do foolish things. That is not to say that I'm thoroughly convinced that he has command hallucinations that tell him what to do, which is a very particular kind of symptom. And if he had them, I would have expected him to be a little more forthcoming about that, though on several occasions he seemed to be saying that. So I'm trying to express my uncertainty and what I'm relying on here, but on balance, I think one would have to say that weight of the evidence is that he hallucinates and continues to.
Just a moment, doctor. You're saying that you have doubt that he has command hallucinations that tell him what to do. But on balance, you believe he has hallucinations. Is that what you meant to say precisely? I'm just asking.
To put it precisely, I'd say that he does have hallucinations, in my opinion, though I'm not 100% certain of that. I would conclude with reasonable medical certainty that he currently hallucinates and did so in July of 1989. I'm less certain that he receives command hallucinations that direct much of his behavior, though I found the few accounts of such command hallucinations he gave to be consistent with the manner in which such things are usually experienced.
No, thank you. Proceed.
As to the subject of delusions, this too is an area where I think there are some uncertainties. Like hallucinations, delusions occur often in schizophrenia and not at all often in schizotypal personality disorder, though it's thought they may. With respect to delusions, what is very clear is that some of the beliefs that Robert has held, some of his expectations, some of what he thinks of the world is unrealistic, untrue, and such that ordinary people can readily perceive the implausibility or the extreme unlikelihood of things being as he thinks they are. And so in that sense, there's no doubt that he has had in July of 1989 very distorted beliefs, assumptions, views. but it does not appear, or I have been unable to find, that there is a large-scale delusional system fixed in his mind and within which he interprets all events. Some schizophrenics have such a large-scale delusional system that determines everything in their lives. In his case, it is more a matter of a number of highly peculiar beliefs, perhaps peculiar enough to be called delusions, such as the belief that he could romance Rebecca Schaeffer, the belief that God may have appointed him to punish her, the belief that he was receiving messages from popular music, and so on. There are many of these things, and some of them have continued. Some of the peculiar beliefs he reports are more plausible, such as thinking that the district attorney's office may have bugged his cell and throwing water in the vent. That might not be as implausible as thinking he was going to hold hands with Rebecca Schaeffer on the beach. And so not all of his odd beliefs are necessarily such as to rise to the level of delusions or bizarre delusions. Yet there are enough of these peculiarities in his thinking, enough things that are really unconnected to the reality that most of us experience, that I think one has to conclude there is delusional thinking here. Likewise, with respect to thought disorder, there I find the most difficult task is sorting out his communicative strategies and difficulties from his possible thought disorder, because his speech is so odd that it's difficult to tell whether that has to do with symptoms that are occurring in that part of the mind that controls thinking. What seemed to me to be occurring in examining him is that he was having several of the recognizable features of those who have a thought disorder, namely that he was having some thought blocking in which he could not formulate the thought and would instead circumvent it and speak of something else. It seemed there were instances in which his thinking was derailed and he would change to a slightly different or even totally different subject, and times that he was having difficulty organizing his thoughts coherently to be able to express what he wished to say. And despite that, one sometimes can glimpse a keen intelligence behind this, because despite that difficulty thinking and communicating, he will at times use elegant language and be able to invoke quite a precise phrase to describe something he's experienced or observed. And at times he even uses a formal stilted language. So it is difficult to quite characterize the nature of his thought disturbance, in part because of the oddity of communication. Yet I would say I suspect strongly that there is a thought disorder there that is always present, and most particularly when he's stressed, and there were a few occasions during the interview where I think he became more stressed, this becomes more apparent, and there is more cognitive slippage, more tendency of his thoughts to become unglued or untracked. Then my conclusion, based on this reasoning and certain other facts from his background, is that with respect to the usual formal criteria for the diagnosis of schizophrenia, he meets those criteria both according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual published by the American Psychiatric Association, and also by the criteria that have been used by researchers in various projects around the world. I compared the criteria from several different research protocols with what I knew about Mr. Bardo. And I think under any of the ways that schizophrenia is diagnosed, he meets the criteria.
Okay, we're done with this, dude. I wanted to watch the video, but I guess he's not going to get to it. And my laptop keeps shutting down my YouTube page. Better not do it during the other trial. 28:43. And what part? Part 5. How many more parts we got of this Joker? It don't look like we get to the video to part 6 and 7. Good gravy, Marie! Dude, shut up already. There are 16 parts to his testimony. 16. It looks like it plays. It looks like they let him play it, but it's not till the next part. We're on part 5. There's 16 parts to his testimony. Good God. Yes, this is why we did not like him. He talks. It's a narrative. Why is prosecution not objecting to the narrative? He just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks and no questions. He just... Nope. Gavel to gavel. Okay. I don't know if it's redirected. It never works for Marty anyways. So, and my laptop keeps shutting down. Not shutting down, but shutting down YouTube. I don't know what it's doing. So, I can't tell you if it's going to redirect because, anyway. Okay, Brian Walsh time. See you over there, guys.